Welcome to the Porsche Club Insider, your one stop for all things Porsche and PCA. Here's your host, Vu Gwyn, and the Insider crew.
Welcome everyone to Porsche Club Insider episode 143. If you're watching on YouTube, you can probably tell we are not in our usual location. This one's going to be tough for me to get through because you can't see it, but behind the camera where Damon is sitting, there's some eye candy there that I'm going to struggle to stay focused. But I am going to stay focused because, Manny, we talk about when we have or people ask about someone buying a car. Take someone with you that knows the ins and out of that particular model. And there's two gentlemen here with us today. I'm going to let you introduce them because you put this interview together. They are around the car collecting world. They help folks that may not be as experienced in the Porsche brand and making sure that the cars that they bring home to their clients are the right cars.
I got to tell you, a lot of people say I know a lot about Porsche and history, but I get very intimidated when I'm around these two guys. I tend to clam up and just sit there and listen to the stories they have. So we have Sam and Gianni, who are the family business is taking care of people's cars and acquiring people's cars. And I met Sam, I think it was maybe our first works reunion in Monterey.
Right, yeah. When we had the last 356 ever made, the 66 police car.
Yes, exactly.
The 10th of 10.
We spoke for a couple hours about the cars and whatnot, and once again, I felt like I went away with a 2-hour master class on these cars. So anytime I see Sam at Works, I tend to pick his brain or ask him about whatever car we're standing next to, because I know I'm going to learn something new.
Speaking of learning something new, in the Porsche world, we always say we're maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation from someone else in the club. And I learned something new today about my 87 Turbolook Cabriolet because there's a little story with Sam, my car, and myself.
I believe it was in 97 or 8, Michael Ovitz, he has a talent agency in Los Angeles. He's very involved in entertainment, talent, all that kind of thing. And he contacted me to sell his car. So I sold it to some people who I knew, Linda Covarrubias and Doc Pryor. And I know that they sold it at some point in the future. I didn't know exactly to whom, but now it's yours.
It's mine, absolutely. Wow. And I thought I heard this story that it was Michael Eisner's car, but you're saying it's Michael Ovitz. So again, right from the get-go,
both in the entertainment business.
Right from the get-go, we enter this hangar and I learned something new, and it's about my own car. So where do you want to start with this, Manny? They've got so much depth in car collecting, the Porsche world. Do we say, how'd you start?
Yeah, let's start from the beginning. How did you get into cars, and what led you to? I know Porsche is not your only mark, but what led you to Porsche?
Well, starting when I was probably 2 or 3 years old, I became a car fanatic, and that was in Italy, and that's a normal thing for a boy in Italy to do, is to become a car fanatic. My first car was a 55 Chevy. My second car was a 56 Chevy. And my third car is what started everything that led up to today. And that third car was a brand new VW Beetle. And much to the dismay of my father, within maybe 3 or 4 weeks of owning it, he came home one day and there I was in the driveway with a mechanic from the local VW dealership. And we had the engine out sitting on the ground, and we were doing the preparation for installing a 356 engine. Well,
you were hot rodding it.
Yeah. Back
Very
in those
cool.
days, the easiest and best way to get more horsepower was just to put a 356 engine in.
You were effectively doubling the horsepower, at least, right?
I put a 62 or 3 Super, which was DIN 75 horsepower. So yeah,
Yeah.
the Beetle that I had was a 40 horse, so
Yeah,
that was pretty much doubling it. So that is actually what led me to Porsches, because I knew what they were, but being Italian, and of course I loved Alfa Romeo and Ferrari and all the rest of that stuff, although I didn't have any of those cars. So it was the Beetle and putting a Porsche engine in that started everything, and then I wound up buying a derelict 55 Speedster and fixing it up, and then sold it, and one led to another, and before I knew it, I was buying and fixing up and selling 356s and 912s and eventually 911s.
For reference sake, when did you buy that Speedster, and what was it cost back in the day?
I bought it without an engine and with some body damage for $400.
Oh my god!
Oh my god! I knew it was going to be some crazy answer.
I bought it from a wrecking yard.
Wow.
Yeah, and the engine that I had put in my Beetle
Did you put it in the Speedster?
wound up going in the Speedster, and so then I bought a succession of Beetles and continued putting Porsche engines into them, and then I in December 1966 I took possession of a brand new 911S at the Porsche factory on tourist delivery. That was my first new Porsche, a 67S.
And what were you doing as a career up to that point?
I was in college.
And you went and you bought a 911S while in college?
You don't. Well, first of all, it only cost on tourist delivery, between buying it and shipping it back, I was in it about $800 or $900 less than if I had bought it here. And yeah, but those $67 or $800 were a lot more than what they are today. But then, by virtue of buying and fixing up and selling so many Porsches, that's how I was able to buy that 67S. And as I said, I was a college student then, but not for long because I got drafted.
Thank you for serving. I heard that story earlier today.
Yeah. So after that, when I came back from the Army, I resumed doing all of what I was doing before, and went back to college, and went back to buying and selling and fixing up Porsches.
Now, did your parents support you and say, were you telling them that you're going to be in this car building, restoring track, or were you planning to do more the collegiate and have some other profession?
The latter. And I got nothing but grief from my father.
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah, nothing but grief. But a funny side anecdote to this is in '79, when I had picked up a brand new 930 at the factory, and I was at my grandmother's house, and the car was a brand new 930, was parked down below, and my grandmother asked me, "When are you going to get a job?"
I've heard those words before.
This is my job.
Yes.
But you didn't know it was your job. You kind of fell into it more.
When did you decide that this is going to be what I'm going to be doing from here on out?
When I graduated from college, what I really wanted to do was go to law school, but I realized that there was no way I could afford it and continue doing what I was doing, which was my source of income. Mm-hmm. I couldn't continue doing that and go to law school and actually accomplish something in law school. So at that point, I thought, you know what, maybe I ought to keep doing this for a while. Well, a while has been the rest of my life.
And here we are.
And here we are today. So it was after graduating from college that I had this revelation, and that's when I got my dealer's license to be able to legally continue doing what I was doing of buying and selling cars.
And where were you doing this?
Long Beach.
Was it at home, or
No.
Did you buy a shop? Or?
No, I rented a
Okay.
a building that was comparable in this to size, and just very humble little building, and I was renting it for like $175 a month, and that was my place of business.
To me, that's very impressive. Someone as young in college having the ability to rent something to work and make ends meet while going to college.
Yeah, and it worked. It worked. And then when I graduated, I went, well, I guess I'll just continue doing this. But that's when I actually got a business license and a dealer's license and did all that. So
at that time, how many cars a year?
in the first few years, maybe 15 or 20. And then I think my record wound up being maybe 40 cars a year. And this is a one-man show.
Yeah.
So I kind of reached the Peter Principle level. I reached the level of my incompetence.
Maximum capacity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I got my dealer's license 51 years ago, May 73.
Wow.
And that car wasn't even built yet. That car was built just a few months later.
He's pointing to a beautiful Gemini Blue 73 911S.
It is a gorgeous car.
Targa.
And now you do more quality over quantity.
Oh, yeah. The quantity thing was only because that's what I needed to do in order to...
So what was the bread and butter of the business at that time? Was it full restoration, or just getting cars that just needed to be cleaned up and ready for the next owner? What was the bread and butter?
It ranged from cars that needed some mechanical work, which I did myself, some relatively light body work, which I had done by other people, and then there were a lot of cars that I bought that just needed to be detailed. But basically, almost immediately, it became 90% Porsche and 10%, 8% Ferrari, and then the occasional Alfa Romeo or, cars that I liked.
Yeah.
I only
And
dealt
all
in
this
cars
is-
that I liked.
All this is in Southern California going on?
Yes.
So you're in the biggest market for Porsche, which is Southern California.
That helped.
I'm guessing you probably didn't even have to advertise. It was just all word of mouth?
Almost entirely word of mouth. Almost entirely.
Well, you
Back-
posted on Facebook, right? That you were.
Yeah, Facebook. Yeah, the way I post right now on Facebook, right?
No, Post-its weren't even invented back
Yeah,
then, so you can't
really,
even say you
really,
posted it.
Yeah. But back then, we did a little bit of advertising in the classified section of the Los Angeles Times. I still have saved some of those pages. You'd be amazed how many Porsches were advertised in those days. So by advertising there a little bit, I started, besides my repertoire of clients and friends who I already had, I expanded it by virtue of advertising in the LA Times. And then after a while, I didn't even do that anymore. It was entirely word of mouth.
Well, you were pretty much at the ceiling of your capacity, right? So sometimes if you got the word out too much, then you would probably disappoint people because you couldn't bring their cars in or get what they needed to be done.
Right.
Yeah.
He recently told me that one of his advertisements were on a K-rail at the Formula One Grand Prix in 1979.
79 at the Long Beach
At Long
Grand
Beach
Prix.
Grand
Wow.
It was still Formula One.
And so I had to go out and dig for photos on the internet and Getty Images. And I'm like, oh, there's my dad's business right
Really?
there. On the,
You
on
found
the,
it?
What was,
Yeah,
the,
I
what
found
was the name of the business back then?
Same as it is now, Cabiglio, S-P-A.
A, okay.
In Italian,
Yep.
S-P-A stands for Società per Azioni, which is the equivalent of corporation. But it's not a corporation because it's here and those letters
Right.
mean nothing here.
Sure.
It could mean specializing in Porsche automobiles, I guess.
There you go.
You
I
can
like
spin
that.
it however you want. It's your business.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think about advertising back in the day. We didn't have Facebook and such. I'm thinking LA Times was kind of like primo advertising. I think in LA area, Southern California, you're talking about the recycler if you're going low budget, right? So,
Well, when I started, there wasn't even a recycler yet.
oh,
Yeah, it was
Wow.
before the recycler came out. But the LA Times was the main forum for advertising any car, not just Porsches.
And wasn't the LA Times owned by Otis Chandler?
Otis Chandler?
Who was a big Porsche person.
Yeah, he was a client of mine.
Manny dropping the knowledge. Where did that come from?
I don't know. Don't ask me my anniversary date, though.
Wow.
Otis was a great guy. He bought an RSK from me.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it because he was a big guy, not fat, but a big, tall guy, very athletic. And there was no way he was going to fit in the car. And he said, don't worry about it. And I said, do you want to sit in there before you? Nah. Okay, well, a year later, he called me and I sold it for him. Then I sold it to Jerry.
So your start was with vehicles, obviously, that were very mechanical, right? And also positive ground and switched. Very, I would say, simplistic cars. But you've been in the business so long, these cars are now getting much more advanced. How did that change the business for you as a one-man show?
During the, after the 993 generation, during the 993 generation is when I met Jerry. And I continued buying and selling cars for a number of years after meeting Jerry. And I really wasn't, back in those days, we had 964s and then culminated in 993s. Once we got into 996s, I didn't buy and resell very many of those. So I continued concentrating on the earlier cars. And I never ever got into buying and selling. Well, I've sold a few 991s for Jerry, but I never went out and actively looked to buy the later cars, mainly because I wasn't that interested. I didn't want to own them. So because I didn't want to own them, I didn't go out and look for them to buy them and resell. I continued concentrating on the earlier cars.
When you have a celebrity client of any sort, is it tough with people soliciting cars to you? Like saying, "Oh, I have a car that
all the
your
time,
client," yeah, really?
all the
I
time.
saw that grin. You've got something to say. I saw that grin.
Well, like it says, like he said, all the time we get, oh, this would be the perfect car, or then the prices are through the moon, or
the
whatever.
only one with this particular option.
Yeah.
One of the problems with that dynamic is that if I personally am looking for a car for myself, everyone automatically thinks it's for Jerry. and so it makes buying cars for myself a little more difficult.
Well, I think an interesting thing that he's dealt with is with the internet, everybody now is more of an expert and has these resources at the tips of their fingers, where back then, they wouldn't know who else to go to. They'd call him and they'd want him to sell the car or anything like that. Now there are so many different options, and they know values more. There are comps and things like that. So it's probably changed a lot in what you can sell cars for and how that all works with the internet.
Definitely. The way business was for myself and a lot of other independent guys who were buying and selling fun cars is that today, because of the internet, people like me, middlemen like me, aren't as necessary because people can just advertise on the internet and find a buyer that way. Back then, we didn't have that medium, so it was a much more personal business back then.
But I would think that we do a thing called Mart Fresh every other week. We each pick a car from our classifieds that we like or that's interesting, and we always preface or finish the little paragraph about having someone look at the car who's familiar with it, because Bring a Trailer will let you know that everyone on Bring a Trailer is an expert, and that's of course not the case. And having someone who really knows what's original, what to look out for in these cars, I still think it's worth the money. Nothing beats experience, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's by virtue of being hands-on and working on the cars, that gave me a foundation that's way beyond what you would get if you just buy and sell. When you're taking cars apart and putting them back together and doing all that, then you start noticing all these little nuances that if later on you look at a car and things have been changed and modified and all that, it becomes very clear quickly because of my familiarity with them. But by the same token, I never acquired that familiarity with anything 991 and later, because I never did those kinds of things with those cars.
Early in your business, when Porsches were then, and they still are, a luxury item, but within the last, I would say, 5-10 years, values of early cars and the notion of people value buying as opposed to buying the cars simply because they like the performance and such. How does that change the environment for you as someone looking for a car and people expecting that there's a positive return or something like that when they're getting into an early car?
Well, you can look at what the car has done value-wise up to that point, but it's critical that people understand that whatever the rate of appreciation was from 10 years ago to today, especially if it had gone up considerably, it would be foolish to think it's going to continue at that same rate. But on the other hand, if you're buying a car that has a tremendous inherent desirability by virtue of whichever model of 356 it is, and now things are so color sensitive that can affect the value considerably. There are so many components to a given car that by considering all of those, you can kind of say, well, this one is so special, it'll probably continue going up, but don't buy it based on what you think it might do. Buy it based on today's value, buy it based on the fact that you like it and you enjoy it, and if it appreciates later, great.
Do you ever have people that come to you thinking that they want something very special, very unique, but then you listen to sort of their potential use case that it's going to be a driver? Do you say you might want to consider something that's less expensive, not less expensive per se, but just something that's not so unique that if you ding it or put a scratch on it and devalue it, like just get a base model something or other? Do you change their minds?
I consider what I know about the person and what other cars I've seen that they own and what they say they want to do with it. And if I think the car is the wrong fit for them, I will suggest something else, because the problem is if it's the wrong fit, and I mean, if they're only buying it thinking they're going to make money and they're going to park it and never drive it, then whatever happens value-wise, that will or won't make them happy. But if it's a car that they're going to use and I don't think that it's the right car for them, I'd rather steer them at least show them something or tell them about something that might be better, because if they buy the wrong car, they're not going to be happy. And then if they're not happy, it just doesn't work for anybody.
What I've done is there have been people who want specific models, say long hood 911s or something like that, and they want to, this is their budget. And I hear all the reasons why they might want a specific car or that long hood 911, but then I'm thinking, well, their budget is not enough to get a really good example of one of those, and that might open up, having issues with the car or needing more work to it than you really want, or not being happy with your purchase. So then I say, well, like, what about an SC or a G series car of whatever for a similar price, and then you're going to get a really good one. It's better, sometimes to spend a little bit more money and get a really good example the first time, rather than the getting something less expensive that's going to have issues and problems or things like that. So I've shifted people's minds on going from a slightly different model just to get a better example.
Do you think their expectations, especially if they've never driven an air-cooled Porsche and they're coming from a newer Porsche, do you try to set expectations or even just have them drive the car to see if, because a lot of people are shocked when they realize that an SC isn't as quick as a base 992 Carrera?
Yeah, I think that it depends on what their use case is, obviously, but we have had the opportunity to drive every model of Porsche and can really tell them what will work well for them or performance wise. And I think people just get very fixated on the look and oh, well, I was born in this year or whatever it might be. To me, I would rather just have a better car, and if it's more performance oriented or you're going to the track or whatever it is, then there might be something that's better for you.
So I got to know, my kids grew up, I have 3 kids, and they grew up with Porsches. We had Porsches before they were born, so there was always Porsches in the driveway or in the garage, and I think they became numb to them, just like having a Chevy. Was it the same for you? Or did you appreciate having a Porsche?
That's a can of worms.
I mean, yeah. Well,
Are you here under duress?
Yeah, I'm forced here because of this guy.
No, he was never forced.
I didn't have a choice, So.
But he was put in the proximity. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I'm Yeah, I am very jaded on all of this stuff for sure, but I really appreciate it and very passionate about the brand and all cars. I love all sorts of makes and models, but it's been a lot of fun growing up with his adventures and being around what he's been able to do, especially in the last 30 years.
Well, one of his adventures, I mean, this is out of chronological order, but one of his adventures was when Bill Gates's 959, when the project on that car was completed at the factory, because the car had come into the USA, it was impounded by U.S. Customs shortly after Bill Gates got the car. It languished for 10 years in a foreign trade zone in Oakland, and that's where a car or any goods would sit without being imported
Until it's cleared.
until it clears.
Is it outside or inside?
Inside.
Inside. Okay.
And it sat inside this building in Oakland, a customs controlled building, for 10 years, during which it basically rotted away. Anyway, I wound up with the project, and it's a much bigger story than what I'm going to go into now. But here's the punchline. When the car was completed at the factory, I went there to inspect it and just to review some paperwork. And Gianni and my wife and daughter, we all went together because we were going to continue to Italy. And this was in 2000. So Gianni was 11, my daughter was 13. The three of us, my wife waited at the factory. The three of us in Bill Gates' 959, we saw 177 miles an hour before I had to take my foot out of it because I was closing on cars and you don't want to be going by them. I was fortunate to have a stretch of Autobahn that was clear to do that. So that was one of his early experiences. So,
Probably not the safest for an 11-year-old.
Probably not, yeah.
Definitely a fun experience.
But the one thing, going back to what you were saying earlier, if somebody has a 991 or 992 or even a 997 or 996, and they're thinking about getting an earlier car, what I always tell them is, when you get into that car, you have to go through a mental adjustment on, put yourself in 1973, if you can, or try to imagine what 1973 is like. Don't go into it thinking it's 1999 or 2013, because then you're going to be disappointed in the way it drives.
Oh yeah, it's that setting expectations. It's something that we always tell our members who call up, ask. I tell them, I said, try to rent one, borrow one from a friend, just go on a drive, because it may not meet the expectations that what you think they are. I had to explain that to my daughter, who wanted a Volkswagen Beetle so badly, and I had to explain to her that it has no air conditioning, marginal heat, and we live in Maryland, so you needed the defroster. All these things that in her mind it was like the new Beetle, but just had the old body. And so, yeah, setting expectations.
With your focus on earlier cars, obviously no more are being made. A lot of people that have earlier cars are holding on to them. And then because of the potential money that might be out there to be made for selling early cars, has that made it harder for you to find authentic replica or cars that are misrepresented? How have you sort of navigated those seas?
Because of the internet, everyone who has a given car, regardless of the condition, they think that theirs is worth as much as the last one that they saw that sold on the internet that might have been a spectacular car and it was worth 10 tenths. They think, well, because it's the same year and model that I have, mine must be worth the same,
Of
even
course.
though theirs needs a total restoration, let's say. So the problem is that a lot of the people who have the older cars today, they're initially anyway totally unrealistic about where the value of their car is relative to other examples that are maybe much, much nicer. So a lot of education needs to be done to enable people to see and understand what the value is of what they have. If they want to sell it, they've got to be realistic. And I see this as an example on Bring a Trailer all the time. I see cars that people think that they set unrealistic reserves. They think, well, theirs ought to be worth what the last one sold for. And so I encounter that all the time.
So I want to get into a project that you're working, actually this project that you started, I believe 20 some years ago, that's going to be But let me just take a quick break and just thank people for listening to the podcast. And if you aren't currently a PCA member, grab that VIN, head over to PCA.org and set yourself up with PCA membership. And for those of you that are looking for your Porsche, we have the test drive program where we'll unlock resources to help you find that special Porsche for your driveway or for your next adventure. So projects. There's some advertising that we've seen, a very special car that's going to be at a Mecum Auction. And it started, I think you said 20-some years ago that car was acquired, right?
Well, we bought that car. Jerry bought that car. I made the deal happen in April of 2001. And the car had gone to auction prior to that in August of 2000. The car still belonged to Dick Atwood. Dick Atwood, along with Hans Hermann, won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1970 in a 917. And Dick Atwood owned the car for a number of years, and we could go even into more of the story if you'd like about the car's life. But in any event, Dick Atwood put the car in an RM auction in Monterey in August of 99. And at the time, I actually suggested to Jerry that he might want to consider buying it, but he wasn't ready, and so somebody else bought it, a fellow by the name of Gallegly, Frank Gallegly. He's a collector in the Midwest. And then in April of 2000, he decided to sell the car, and that's when I found out that it was for sale. So again, I suggested to Jerry that he consider the car, and this time he did consider it. The funny thing that happened, we went to Willow Springs Raceway, and Symbolic, who was marketing the car for Frank Gallegly, Symbolic transported the car to Willow Springs Raceway, and Chad McQueen joined us.
Ah.
And so Chad put the car through its paces at Willow until the right front wheel fell off the car.
Oh.
Minor detail.
Ouch.
Hardly did any damage, but it was rather dramatic. In any event, it didn't prevent Jerry from buying the car. So that was in April of 2000.
Do you happen to recall when the car was sold at RM in 99 what it went for back then?
I think it was 1.2.
Yeah, there's a video of the sale on YouTube. You can find it. And
1.2.
Yeah, like 1.1, 1.2, and it was.
That's still a lot of money, but in 99, that's a lot of money.
Was this the first race car for his collection, or had he bought other?
He had a 550 Spider prior to this, but it was street registered.
Yeah.
So, the 917 values at the time were kind of in that range. A good one, not with a Le Mans winning history, obviously, or a major Daytona winning history or something like that. But a 917 was probably in the low 1 million range. But the most significant thing is the Steve McQueen obsession had not exploded yet. That is a major component in this conversation. But that had not occurred yet. So
How come?
It occurred a few years later, where all of a sudden this Steve McQueen mania.
But nothing changed. I mean,
nothing changed. But
it's just people decided they would recognize that, and now it's a thing.
Who knows what the spark was that ignited the passion that caused Steve McQueen's sunglasses to sell for $70,000. Which is kind of odd because sunglasses don't have a chassis number or a Carfax. So how do you really know that those were the actual?
Right.
But the 917 it's got a serial number.
Yeah.
You know.
So this 917, I always find it interesting that a golf livery 917 never won Le Mans.
Correct.
But yet it's probably the most popular livery on a 917 that people associate with.
Because of the movie.
Yes, exactly. The only time it won was in the movie. But this car was painted with the golf livery by Richard Atwood, right?
Yes. Since he had driven the race-winning car, he had this car painted to look like the Salzburg car, the red one with the thin white stripes.
Right.
And for many years, this car looked like that car. In fact, when it participated in some events in England,
Yeah, raced in Goodwood and different historic racing. So, yeah, after Richard Atwood owned the car, he converted it to the Salzburg livery, and there's a big Motorsport magazine article on it in the Salzburg livery and things like that. But then before he sold it, it was switched back to the Golf livery.
Now, did he keep? I was stuck in my head. I've been dying to ask this. On the door, there's a inscription by Steve McQueen to his mechanic. Is it?
No, just to the car.
To the car.
So,
Okay.
yeah, we're jumping around in a lot of different the timeline of the car for sure. But the, I mean, we can go back to like the car was acquired by Solar Productions for the making of the movie. So that was Steve McQueen's production company, Solar Productions. And this is chassis 917-022. So that's the full chassis number of this specific car. Still has the original engine, which is 917-022. And so
that means the 22nd.
Well, I guess it's the 20. Right? Yeah. So
the 25, the famous picture of the 25 cars. This was in that group.
Number 22 of that. So it was in the first batch that the FIA inspected and things like that. So it's technically built in 1969, and then they quickly were sold to John Wyer's team or whoever, and used as long tails or short tails. And so this one was pretty much immediately converted to the short tail specification. I think it was prepped by John Wyer and John Wyer's team, and painted the number 20 Golf livery to represent what Brian Redman and Joe Siffert were driving in the 1970 24 Hours of Le Mans. So they kind of replicated the movie car to represent a lot of the cars that actually ran the race. So it was the number 20 Golf livery during the majority of the making of the movie. And then it, from what we can see, it looks like, because they had 3 917s on set, maybe more, but 3 that were mainly in the Golf livery. And one of them was crashed during the making of the movie.
It was a Lola.
No, that one's for the making of the movie. They actually, they filmed a Lola, and that was their on-screen crash of a car. But actually, during the filming, David Piper was behind the wheel of chassis 13, and then crashed, and unfortunately, subsequently lost his leg not because he lost it in the wreck, because he was flew back to England, and the doctor was on holiday or something like that, and took him a while to get to working on his leg, and the end was to amputate. So so they could have been avoided. The delay is really what caused it.
That wasn't the green one that he owns now, does it?
And he has a green 917.
That wasn't the one that he crashed.
No. Okay. So they had a few. They had another one that was leased by Joe Siffert, and leased from Joe Siffert, and they used in the making of the movie. So they had all 3 numbered Golf liveried cars during the making of the movie, 20, 21, 22, and of the numbers on the side of the car. And because the number 21 car, which was chassis 13, crashed, from what we can see, it looks like they had changed the livery at one point to chassis 022 to the number 21 livery, maybe even the number 22 livery, because again, the chassis 022 was owned by Solar Productions and Steve McQueen. They could do whatever they really wanted with the car, whereas the other cars were leased. So, and that goes into some of the things that we discovered during the restoration of some of the modifications that we found, and camera mounts and things like that. But so that's how that car started life, was in that number 20 livery, which is its most famous livery, and was used throughout the making of the movie. And the history of the movie is that it took a long time to make, because there was not really a script. They went through different directors, and so Steve had all sorts of ideas, and then they started modifying the cars and going different directions with the filming, and it's interesting to have watched that movie frame by frame, and then also look at the race that happened in 1970 and figure out the different cars and see how things changed during the making of the movie.
But 22 is the hero car, the one that's in the movie.
Chassis 22 is the hero car that Steve McQueen Solar Productions owned, and this is the one that is being offered by Mecum.
Drives, yeah,
Yes.
in the movie.
It's the primary car that he used in the making of the movie.
Because the car that they put the camera where you see the in-car shots, was that the 908 that they owned?
So they also had a 908 that they ran during the real race in 1970 as a camera car.
It finished 8th, didn't it?
Yeah, the 1970 24 Hours of Le Mans was a very interesting race because it was basically a race of attrition. It rained and very few cars finished, and really a Golf liveried car should have won. John Wyer and his team were doing very well, and then all 3 cars in the night had a problem. And so that was another thing that I think kind of delayed the filming, because they would have loved to have had more racing scenes, actual racing scenes for the movie from the actual race. But because all 3 cars that they were trying to represent, these Golf liveried cars, crashed, they were limited on how much footage they actually had. And that opened up the door for the Salzburg livery car with Richard Atwood driving to actually win the race.
Which in itself, I always told people, I go, this could be a Netflix special. Because that car was entered by, Ferry Porsche's sister.
Yeah, Salzburg.
Yeah, Salzburg.
Louisa Pieck.
And Ferdinand Pieck, he kind of like slid that car in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that car didn't even qualified very poorly.
Yeah, it didn't qualify well. Yeah.
But John Wyer, did I read that he didn't realize that
Yeah,
Pieck was gonna do this?
John Wyer and the other customer teams were pretty upset that Porsche showed up basically with multiple factory cars and had different support, because Louisa Pieck was part of the family and was able to do things that they weren't allowed to do, and
Full access.
There were other problems too, and that is that since Ferdinand Pieck was involved in large part in the design of the car, he had some tricks up his sleeve, which he didn't share with John Wyer, which was supposed to be the factory team. And it's all of these conflicts that ultimately led to Porsche going from a KG to an AG.
So now that the car is in the collection, what was the condition and what was the steps to get it to where it's today?
It was a complete car, running, driving, in good condition.
an old race car.
It was an old race car.
Good, real old race car.
But with not a whole lot of Steve McQueen wasn't a driving point behind it, right?
When
That wasn't
when you
something
bought
that
it?
you were pushing Jerry to buy because it was a Steve McQueen car, or was it the fact it was this 917?
80% because it was a cool 917. Yeah. And as I said, back then the whole Steve McQueen thing had not exploded yet. I was a fan of Steve McQueen's movies and all that, and in particular of that movie. And it was primarily because it was the movie car and it was a 917. And the price was, there was no bump in the price, so Jerry was not paying a Steve McQueen premium. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was just a cool car to buy. And it was a usable car right then, would not have been usable for actual racing and vintage racing because it needed some things. And initially, we had Carl Thompson, who used to be with Waszek Polak. He set up a shop on the west side of Long Beach, and he had a fellow whose last name was Nietzsche. He came out and was doing some engine work for Carl, and he did some external work on the engine of this car, on the injection, a few things like that. They basically went through the car and tidied up a few things so that we could safely take the car and play with it at tracks.
And at what point did you decide we're going to now approach it as a full restoration?
Oh.
And where do you source parts? Where do you get the knowledge?
Yeah, that didn't occur until, Jerry had owned the car now for 20 years before that came up.
Okay.
And we showed the car at Pebble Beach in 2021 for the 917 class. And we approached Jerry and said, hey, it's, cars, an old race car like that, at a certain point, you're kind of like, we need to do something with it. And the more that I had researched the car after being around it for 10 years, and the photos that I know that I have and all of the references, there were things that were wrong with the car. The livery was a little bit wrong. The engine was leaking a little bit of oil, more than, that I like that Porsches leak. And there was a little bit of a fuel leak, and it was getting a little tired in a way that it's like, we now need to do this car justice. And and it was we have the tools, we have the right people to do it, and why not get it done and do it right.
So we were curious how much, as far as resources and ties back to Porsche AG with this project, were they part of it?
No, I can't recall that we ever reached out to Porsche in any capacity to get advice on this project whatsoever.
So just within your world, you had enough resources to.
We work very closely with Joe Cavalieri, and he's one of the best restorers in the business. He's done the first 935, 550-03, RSKs.
He did 550-04, the car that won its class at the Carrera Panamericana, that is in the Porsche Museum.
Right.
Yeah, so he's one of the best.
That's one of Joe Cavalieri's restorations.
Yeah, Joe's team with Christian and Brad Hand was involved, and different painters who we know, like Luis, and then Dave Merrick, who's a designer at Honda, who's a 917 freak and just loves the cars. And even though he works for Honda, he's super passionate about these cars, wanted to, as a passion project, wanted to make sure the livery was correct. And then Ed Pinks, who did the engine, and Adrian Gang and John Bunin, who did the transmission. I mean, it's all the right people at the right time to make something like this happen. And yeah, we didn't really need Porsche, I guess, because we had when you start a restoration like this, you kind of sit around and look and say, well, at what point in time do you want to pick for the restoration? Like, what point of time do you want the car to represent? And one could argue that we should have used a Team Auto Ustau livery from when it ran the 1971 season with Reinhold Jost and Willi Kausen. But what worked best for us was, and what is the most famous, is the number 20 Golf livery car. And so it would have been, as a racing enthusiast, maybe better to put it in a race livery, but for us, it was the best to put it, into a correct movie livery. And, with the guys who, and it's very easy to start a restoration when you start with such a good car, when you're not missing a bunch of parts, when you have everything, you know what you need, you can, the history of the car, you've known where it's been for the last 20 years. That's a lot easier than starting fresh with a lot of unknowns.
And did you have a specific timeline for completion?
Well, I mean, anytime you enter a restoration of this caliber, there are typically no timelines.
Yeah.
But then
we wound
up with one,
yeah.
And that's always difficult. So I think Joe is still recovering from a lot of sleepless nights, but they got it done, and it's spectacular.
917s were notorious for their level of difficulty to drive. Did this one experience any wrecks during its life? And
no major accidents. I mean, that's one of the amazing things about this car, which is, like, I love that it's an old race car, and that's really truly the vibe of the car, because it was never fully destroyed in any way. I mean, maybe a few bruises and nicks here and there during the 71 season, but after the 71 season, it went to a mechanic, and they refreshed the car mechanically and sorted it, and then it was purchased by Brian Redman in 75.
Well, the mechanic never got paid.
He never got paid.
He put a mechanics lien on it.
Exactly.
And then a bank wound up with it, and then Brian Redman bought it.
Yeah, so Brian Redman owned it for a little bit, and it sat a little bit, and we recently worked with him at Road America when Mecum wanted to do a video photo shoot with the car, and Brian Redman was telling this story on how it was just kind of sitting around, and one day his buddy came over or something like that and said, does it run? And I guess it wouldn't start or something like that, and he thought that the clutch may have been rusted or frozen together. So he pushed it out of his garage, was in the car, and popped the clutch downhill, and it freed up the whole drivetrain and came to life. And so, anyway, just a funny story.
One of two things could have happened.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, I mean, but back then in 1975, 76, nobody cared. Brian Redmond admitted that he didn't even know really the true history of the car when he bought it. He wanted a 917 and didn't know that it was the movie car, and he knew it had some racing history, but didn't know that even Joe Siffert drove the car one time and actually was pretty successful in its.
That was at Vallelunga, wasn't it?
Vallelunga, yeah. So it's and then it's so. Yeah, it's interesting to see how the people who were involved with this car have all their different stories.
Now, my next question I know is going to be a fulsome answer, so I'm going to pause and just remind people, if you haven't signed up for PCA's newsletters, Performance News, eBrake News, and Mart Fresh, just head over to pca.org and set yourself up. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the upcoming events. We've got Works Reunion Amelia Island at the Amelia River Club, March 7th, 2025. We have Treffin Homestead, April 30th to May 4th. And then we also have the Omni Homestead Resort registration opening February 5th. Porsche Parade for 2025 will be in Oklahoma City, July 6th through 12th, 2025. Treffin at Sea, our 70th anniversary cruise, which will be August 30th to September 6th. That registration is open, and we've crested over 800 members heading on that cruise. If you're also looking to race, but in a more controlled environment, PCA Sim Racing, check them out. They can help you get set up with racing with PCA peers. You've got those that are amateurs as well as those that are well advanced. They're going to put you in the right class so that you can have maximum fun. So the question that I have for you is, after this journey with the car and putting together a timeline, it's done, and now it's possibly going to a new owner.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's
A bit bittersweet for us.
That's what I'm
sure.
thinking, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very melancholy, because now that it has a fresh engine and everything else corrected, the car would really be exciting to drive. I've had the good fortune of driving it on numerous occasions at Willow Springs, Laguna Seca, Daytona for the Rennsport, the one in 07, whatever, 3, I think that was 3. And the car was great, but now it's greater.
Yeah.
And I will not have driven it in its greater state of affairs. But
I got to drive it a little bit.
in anger?
Not in anger. Did you drive it in anger?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, well, I drove it at the
So
Road
this
America.
is
Yeah.
Johnny's confession
Oh, yeah,
story.
you drove it at Road America.
Yeah, we drove it recently at Road America for the filming with Mecum, and Brian Redmond drove as well, which was super fun. And
Is it intimidating to drive? 'Cause to me, it looks like, first of all, how valuable it is. So I'd be afraid to put it in the wrong gear or over rev it.
I think when you have as much experience of driving all of these kinds of cars, you kind of get used to that. The biggest difference for me is that the engine is just so loud right behind you, and you're in something that is so powerful that like you definitely have to have
Respect at all times.
Exactly.
Are you supposed to take it to a certain RPM?
Oh, it wants
for
to rev.
shift?
I mean, but it also is pretty docile. I mean, we had an issue with the shifter at Road America, and so we only had first and second gear, and maybe that was for the best. So we were, at slower speeds, but it was very happy just putting around at 4,000 RPM.
I've seen you squeeze into a 908. You're a pretty tall dude.
Yeah.
And a 917, how do you fit?
Well, the beauty of the 917 is you're basically laying down, so you've got it's pretty nice that there's a decent amount of headroom even with a helmet. And you can, if you were really tall, like say you wanted to buy the car and you were taller, then you can get the seat adjusted to you and work for you. So there's a decent amount of room in the cockpit.
The 917, I found it to be quite comfortable. I'm about 5'11". I was very comfortable. And the 90803, my knees literally are jammed against a transverse frame tube that's right under the dash. So the 90803 has a lot of headroom, like all the way to the moon. But knee room, not so much. But the 917 to me was very comfortable. What helped me considerably in driving, in getting comfortable with the 917, is that I used to race a 914 6 GT, and I knew it well. I was very comfortable with it. The 917 is a monster 914 6 GT, but the layout, in the 914 6, the engine was right behind my head, just like the 917. There's a big difference clearly between driving any car at 8/10 versus 10/10, and I never ever drove the 917 at 10/10. I got to maybe 8/10, and it was not problematic at all. I was very comfortable at Daytona on the banking and transitioning to and from the banking and everything else. And at Laguna Seca and the corkscrew, God, I want to do it again.
Wow. Did you ever imagine what it must be like driving in the rain?
No.
In competition with that car?
No.
And I think that's the, what's interesting about the K specification is it was easier for the guys to drive it back in the day, but the early cars with the long tail configuration that was not sorted, they were very scared of the car, and that's when they had some accidents and things like that. So it seems like once they started to play with the aerodynamics, they were able to get some of those things under control and make the car more drivable.
So I got to ask before we finish, the door.
Oh yeah,
So
I was
going back
going
to
to.
the
yeah,
door.
we started with the
So
door.
the door situation with the note on the door, it says finished. Thanks for staying together, Steve McQueen, and so that's his, paying homage to the car and how he was driving that car for a year, and another note to basically say how important that car was for the making of the movie. And so that was done after the filming. And how we actually found out about that was at its first race in Argentina in 1971. It showed up to the race in a Gulf livery with that signature still on the door. So Reinhold Jost and Monguzzi was his co-driver. I think Willie Cowson was sick or something like that. They ended up running the car with kind of a camouflaged Gulf livery with that signature on the door. They had taped some numbers over it. So that's kind of how we discovered that was on the door, and we copied that. And if somebody doesn't like it, they can wipe it right off, and it's not a
So Richard
permanent
Howard
thing.
probably painted over it then when he did.
Well, it was painted over during the
Before that?
71
Okay.
season when Willie Cowson and Reinhold Jost were sponsored by, they had their team Alto Ustau, and they had the yellow and green livery. So if you see this yellow and green 917 with dorsal fins, that was them really driving the car at all sorts of different races in the 71 season.
Well,
So
they won their class, the 5-liter class, at the 1,000 kilometers of the Nürburgring in 1971. What was ironic about that is that the 90803 came into existence specifically to win 2 races, the 1,000 kilometers of the Nürburgring and the Targa Florio, because Porsche wanted to win the manufacturer's championship at all costs. And they didn't think that the 917s could prevail at those 2 tracks because of twisty, windy, etc. Well, that point was really proven in 1971 when the 90803 won the race, the 1,000 kilometers of the Nürburgring, and this 917 finished, what, 4th? Or
I think it was like 5th, yeah, 4th, 5th, something
but
like
first
that.
in class.
First in class.
So that only proved that their concern was valid because it didn't win the race. The 90803 did.
Now, I was very much involved with the Classic Club Coupe and the auction there.
Right.
And I can tell you it was the longest 8 minutes of my life. And I was so happy to find out who won the car. You've decided to place the 917 also in an auction. How are you feeling? What's going through your mind, and what is your hope for outcome?
Before I get to the outcome, my feelings are very, very mixed because this car has been a big part of my life for 23 years. And having driven it a number of times, and to me, it's the quintessential race car. Race cars have to not only be successful, they have to look good. And to me, I mean, I know the 919s are unbelievable. Unbelievable. But you know what? You need an army of technicians in order to even start the car. And
You just need the two of us to start the 917. It's pretty easy.
my Nissan Frontier truck, a 2-axle open trailer, and my son is all we need to go race that 917. But regardless, it is a spectacularly beautiful car. The magic of that era, the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s. You look at the 69, 70, 71 season, the competition was fierce with the Ferrari 512s and everybody else, the Alfa Romeos and everybody else competing. It was a turning point that I don't think will ever be replicated again because of so many other things that have gotten, racing's become so controlled now. That was a free-for-all time in a way. It was
Different
exciting.
era.
Different era, different
era.
world, different time.
May I respectfully ask, because I think our viewers know I'm very much a hoarder, so I have to ask, how can you let it go? Or why do you let it go?
You can't drive it on the street, although we've done things like that. You can't legally drive it on the street, and therefore the only time Jerry can really enjoy it is when we rent a track. And we've done that quite a few times. Jerry just doesn't have the time, and he has a wonderful philosophy about when the time is right to sell a car. When he realizes that he's not really using it anymore, he wants someone else to enjoy it. Regardless of whether it's going up, down, or sideways in value, that's irrelevant. Even if, and in the case of this car, we can be sure that whatever it sells for today, it probably will be worth more tomorrow. But that's not the point. The point is Jerry wants someone else to enjoy it. And after 23 years, the time has come.
Yeah, he's the longest owner of the car.
He's
owned it longer than any of the others.
And he's going to let someone else have the next experience.
Somebody else's turn.
Yeah, and it's ready to go, which is...
And that's the beauty. They're going to get a car that's ready to go.
With no stone unturned and no dollar spared in the restoration, done by the best people.
I don't think there's ever been an opportunity for someone to buy, and this sounds weird to say, a turnkey 917.
Probably not. I mean, there are a few, but I think that in the past they've either had chassis issues or been over restored, and that's one thing that I love so much about this particular car is that there are no issues with the authenticity of it, and we didn't want to over restore it. One of the key things that Jerry asked for as we embarked upon the restoration is to not lose the character of the car, and because of that old race car feeling, we didn't want to lose a lot of that. So during a restoration, yes, you can go through and redo everything, but we left little touches to keep some of that old school characteristic, like the shift knob is the original
steering wheel.
The steering wheel has the patina on it. And one of the major things that we did was we never fully removed the cockpit from the frame. The frame, all of the fiberglass parts are on the aluminum frame are fiberglassed over, and we never fully removed the cockpit because there was no need to. It was in such good condition as it when we started that we would be wasting more time and going backwards, and again losing a lot of that the character of the car. So keeping that cockpit on the frame, it's never been removed ever in its life, is a cool thing to say, and add leave some of that character in the restoration and not making it over restored or anything like that.
Sam, Johnny, thank you so much for the conversation today, inviting us in here and having the planes and helicopters go through the stores. We could probably sit here for another 6 hours, so hopefully you'll indulge us and come back on the podcast, and we'll pick another topic and continue. I want to just share with those that are listening, if you're looking for PCA Insider merch, head over to PCA web store. We've got bottles, mugs, and t-shirts. And of course, if you're looking for a PCA Insider decal, just drop us a message at podcast@pca.org. Again, we wish you the very best. We hope to be in Kissimmee to see the next chapter be unveiled for the 917. Manny, anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think we would go on another hour, 2 hours.
Easily,
I got so many
easily.
more questions.
Yeah, and there's so many more topics, right?
I know.
So again, thank you for listening. If you aren't currently a PCA member, grab that VIN, head over to PCA.org, set yourself up with PCA membership. If you're not currently a member, you can join the test drive program, and again, we'll unlock some resources to help you find that dream Porsche of yours. Remember to follow our podcast Instagram page, behind the scenes photos and videos, Porsche Club Insider, all one word. We love it if you would give a like, comment, subscribe. We read every single note that you leave us. Until next time, stay safe, and we'll catch you down the road.
Thank you.
Thank you.